that had to have been tough to have a testimony, but be in a loving relationship and
it was. If she hadn't have I really had a hard time being fully involved. I think more than she did, and she really wanted the relationship, and so the more I kind of backed off, she finally just found someone that wasn't a church member and was fine with
no complications,
buying a house together and all the things that she wanted to do for the most part, unless it came up. And so it came up less often for her. Let's just say that. Her testimony bothered her less often than it did me. And plus, given she'd already done the temple marriage bit and had an abusive husband, so I'm going to guess that made a difference.
Sure,
I still less had, I was losing the idea that, I'll just go get married to some guy in the temple. Now it wasn't looking quite so possible or plausible. But nonetheless, when I moved and thought, I'll do what's right, and I couldn't really be sober, and I had the girlfriend I dated a little, so she'd come out sometimes, and so that kind of dragged on for a while. And then I called the bishop. That I figured out what ward I was in, and I called the bishop of a singles ward and met with him and told him my situation, and he was great. He's the reason I got back into the gospel.
Wow.
The case isn't the same for friends. I have friends that the bishop's the reason they never came back to church.
Say, that's different than.
So I'm very aware. So.
We can hear it, but we're going to keep going because.
I'm sorry.
Because we can see it, hopefully. So. But yeah.
So for whatever reason, I was blessed with a bishop that was, understanding. He was a convert. That may have helped.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And he didn't know. We're in the 80s, mid 80s now. He didn't really know what to do, but he was okay with not knowing what to do, and he knew that I had a testimony, but he knew I was using drugs and alcohol. I just told him everything, but I said I have a testimony and I want to come back to church. I just don't know how exactly I can do that.
Right.
So he had me quit seeing the girlfriend, which wasn't that big a deal, honestly, because I was still in love with Tracy. So I just was dating somebody else because. So anyway, I started seeing the bishop more and started going to church. And I was still drinking, but he was great. He said, I don't care, if you can't quit right now, that's fine. We just want you in church.
Cool.
So he was really good about that.
That's great, Did that instantly, that seems like it's already was like sort of against what you thought the church was about,
He was a huge surprise. He was talk about paradigm shifts. He was a paradigm shift in what I expected, and I expected him to be punitive and, how could you do this horrible stuff, and, terrified or whatever.
Right.
Nobody talked about any of that back then.
That's so cool that you have.
So he was great. So he said, I just want you to come to church, whether you quit or not, I don't care. I just want you to come. And he did say, can you quit seeing, this girl? And I said, yeah, I can. It's not that big a deal. So maybe 6 months of going to church, I was cutting back on drugs and alcohol. I was kind of starting to do pretty good. And I was still talking to Tracy on the phone. Just as friends. For her, it was friends, I think, because she, I don't know if she was, I think she was probably kind of still in love too. But it was kind of tearing me apart. So when I went back to see her,
I want to hear this. I know you've got like really hot on her face, so let's just turn. We're gonna turn, and we're gonna stand here and talk for a little while.
Okay.
Because it's just the sun's gonna keep changing, and the helicopter.
You don't mind the wind.
So you're calling her a little bit, but
but I'm still really in love. But yet I'm trying to get back in the gospel, and my feelings for her are just painful. It's just painful. So I'm thinking I just can't even talk to her on the phone. I just gotta cut off all ties.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of what I don't have, and it reminds me of why I don't want to go to church.
Yeah.
But
painful.
It wasn't hard for me with any other woman at that point. It was just her.
Wow.
So I went and saw her and I said, I'm sorry, but I don't know how to not be in love with you, and talking to you just rips me apart, and I'm sorry. And she said, well, you know what? I don't know how to not be in love with you either. And we got back together.
Wow.
So I went in and I told the bishop, because I liked him, I said, I really appreciate your time, but, I went back and I saw Tracy and we're both still in love, and so, she's going to move out here, and you can take my name off the records if you want. And it was very interesting. He just paused for a while, and then there was like, spirit came into the room. It was just, you could just feel it was tangible. And he said, you'll turn your life to hell if you leave.
Wow.
And it just turned like black, because it was, and I don't even think he said, what it would be, and he didn't say it, but it was like, I had this sense of, not just with women, but I mean, drugs and alcohol, I mean, suicide, I mean, I know where I would have gone. That's the thing. If I didn't have a testimony, I would have been so much worse with drugs and alcohol. I was already abusive with it. But I would have been off the charts on drug row street. So anyway, but I had the strongest sense that the Spirit of Christ was taken from me. The light of Christ was taken.
Oh, wow.
And it just went black. It was almost as if the whole room went dark. If you've ever had like kind of a spiritual experience where almost things feel sort of lighter, it was kind of like that, only things went dark, and I literally couldn't move. I just was paralyzed there, sitting in the chair for a while. And I think he said a couple things I don't remember. And then all I remember him saying is, "Are you all right?" And the only thing that kind of got me out of it was this. It was as if this is what you'll do with your life. You're gonna go completely away from the Spirit. That's where you'll head. But you can do this. There was just like, it started to get light again, almost like there was this hope flickering. It really felt like Christ was saying, but don't do that. I'm not saying that's where you ought to be. I'm saying, please, you can do this. I'm just saying this is not what you want.
Wow.
And it was not what I wanted. It was very clear. And that experience alone, that feeling I had, got me out of it too. I mean, it was really two things: the bishop and that feeling where the Spirit took the light from me to just give me a sense of,
like a taste of,
like, really, is this what you want? Because this is where you'll go. And I am very much like that. Speaking of bipolar, I'm either like, really obedient and right on it, or
whatever.
If I don't follow it,
right.
I'm like, oh, why not do this and that and da da da. There's no good reason not to. It's that whole risk-taking thing, I think,
human
too.
nature to a degree.
So, but it was miserable. It's not like it solved anything.
No.
It made it worse, kind of. And I went back to Tracy and I'm sobbing, and I'm like,
what do I do?
I know I said move here, but, I have a testimony, and you know what, I don't think I can leave the church. And
oh my gosh.
so we went back and forth for, I don't know, a year and a half, like that. I'd say, okay, I'm not going to see her, and then I'd see her, and then I'd say, okay, I'm going to see her, but we won't be involved, and then we would.
Make those compromises.
And you know what? It was the Spirit. I mean, the reason the bishop was so great is because he was willing to follow the Spirit. You could tell. I'd come back in and be like, oh shoot, I know I said I wouldn't see her, and I did, and I knew he'd be upset, and he'd be upset, but you could tell he'd react, and then he'd just like take a breath, and it was like the Spirit came, rather than just saying, oh, how could you? He I mean, occasionally he did, I'm sure when he needed to, sort of that, reprove be times with sharpness, followed by love. He'd do that, and he was gifted with it. He was a gifted man in many ways, and so I slowly kept coming back to church. And I slowly saw less and less of her.
Wow.
And
but again, like, no matter whatever political sort of spectrum people may think they're on, and how they feel about the
any of
realities
it,
of
who
sexual
identifies
identity,
and blah blah blah.
Like, no, like
I don't
the
care.
human experience of you going through that and feeling that's what this film is about. The intense pull of a testimony that you can't deny.
The struggle.
And this feeling
and these feelings
of
of
love.
love.
You're like, I cannot not. I don't know how to not be in love with her.
Yep.
And then
Hence
the work,
the conflict.
the work of going down a path that you choose.
And
people don't
either path,
appreciate.
right, and either
right.
path, let's face it,
Right.
I don't think either path is easy.
Right, exactly.
You know, if you have a strong testimony of the gospel and you're attracted to the same gender, there is not an easy path.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
you're in trouble.
Yeah,
You're in for a hard road, and
yeah.
that's part of why, you know, it's part of why it's definitely why I decided to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember which came first, going through the temple, or I wrote my story for somebody because a counselor was working with a lady, and she said, I think you should tell her your story about your struggle, and she has never known anybody else that struggled with this. And you know, at that time the church had nothing. There was there were no materials whatsoever. The counselor, you know, counselors didn't know what to do even, and and really the reason I was saved by the bishop is because he knew he didn't know what to do, so he completely depended on the Spirit.
Wow, that's a big statement.
And that's what saved me. That's what brought me back. And it was always acceptance, you know, and it was always love, and it was always, you can do this. He just said, I know you're going to get out of this. And he really knew it. You know, I don't know how he knew. Well, I'm sure the Spirit let him know, but when he would say, I know you're going to get out of this, I knew he was speaking truth.
Right.
I mean, I really did. It was just like, it was almost him as a prophet. He was really, there was a real sense of prophecy in that. And so
powerful relationship.
it was a powerful relationship.
That you don't see that often.
No, you don't see that often. Wow. So I got out of it, and I quit seeing her completely, and I still struggled with the whole word of wisdom thing, but I got, you know, cut way back. Then I had a chance to take a job in Texas and leave the ward and leave him, and I was kind of nervous about it, but he said, you know, I think you're far along enough, you're going to do this, you can do this. So I moved, and 6 months must be a magic number for me. It was about 6 months. The bishop committed suicide.
You're a bishop?
Yeah. He was bipolar, I found out later. And apparently he'd quit taking his meds and tried to start taking them again, and they had no effect, and he just went straight down.
Oh my gosh.
So that wasn't good.
I'm sorry, yeah. Oh
that
my
one
gosh.
was, that took everything out of me.
Right. Here is this
Everything
sort
out
of
of me.
rock that you've been
Holden, I mean, I'd been talking to him, I'd visited twice, he'd given me blessings, but the last time I saw him, I distinctly remember he had this sense of, he looked different.
Yeah.
And it felt different. I remember distinctly thinking that the Spirit didn't seem the same. And he even said, you know, you can do this, you got to do this. You got to be able to do this. And it just had a real...
Yeah. And my first thought was, oh, now we can see sort of where the quality of love and patience and yet determination, you know, was coming from him.
Yeah.
He had his things that he was
Yes,
working
he
with.
did. Well, yeah, looking back,
yeah.
in fact, later when I was diagnosed bipolar and was kind of resistant about medication, I went to the temple and I had just the strongest sense that he was there, of his presence, and he said, take medication.
Yeah.
That was just it. It was like, I almost heard the words, take medication. That was it. And it was like, I just knew it was, I knew it came from him.
Right.
I was like, yeah.
Okay.
All right, that is a good point. I didn't think of it that way, but you're right.
Right.
And, you know, and I had 3 kids at the time. He had several. He had 2 that were still at home.
So you're in Texas when he takes his life.
And that was a blessing, because if I had
As you
still
say.
been there, I probably would have joined him, I'm sure.
Right.
I mean, I had enough suicidal thoughts myself when things got so bad.
Right.
And I think it was after that. It was after that I had a gun. And there was more than one time when I held the gun to my head and pulled back the hammer and rested my finger on the trigger. And I even remember banging my elbow on the bed, kind of hoping that...
Right, accident?
Yeah, or just hoping that I just couldn't, could not pull the trigger. So I thought, maybe if I, you know, bang this, I can somehow get the trigger pulled. So that's a sign things are not going.
No, of course, unsustainable.
It was horrible.
Let's hold for that one. That one's a little bit more obnoxious. I'm glad we stopped. I felt it coming. You know, let's stop.